and their work on the Niagara River Remedial Action Plan. We wouldn't be able to do it without them. So with that, I would like to thank you so much for your time, and of course, I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Great, thanks, Natalie. It sounds like lots of work has been done. Does anyone have questions or comments for Natalie? Okay, I do. Oh, go ahead, John.
Just out of curiosity, what would be the guesstimate for getting that compliance with the or getting off the map as you indicated?
So to be removed as an area is first we need to complete all of those remaining actions that are listed in our delisting strategy. That's the very first step. After that, we would have to go to the public and look for support, prepare a really big report supporting and for approval to do that. So it's the public consultation process and the public engagement process is really the key part of that. And I've seen some areas of concern in the past not being able to get through that that engagement process.
Okay. Other questions, John? No? Okay. Carrie, you have your hand up? Yes, no?
Yeah, I was just going to let you know that Harry did join the meeting. He was having some technical issues. And I just wanted to point out that whenever someone else is speaking, Jackie, if you could mute yourself, because there seems to be like a feedback loop or something. Well, for that's for everybody. I've been muting you a few times. Sorry. That's why
that's great.
I just
was not getting it to mute properly, so I just stopped pushing the little button because it was beeping. I'm sure in Natalie's ear. I will definitely work on that.
I just didn't want you to think I just kept trying to mute you, but it was just because there was a weird feedback thing. So thank you, Harry.
People would wish they had that button. Thank you. Welcome, Harry. Okay, I just have one question, Natalie, on the follow-up with this process. Is there any kind of a follow-up monitoring system that goes on basically, you know, as you're clearing all these you know, issues?
Thank you. So there isn't formally, but we have been trying as a committee to ensure that monitoring happens. And sorry, Jackie, I'm going to mute you. There we go. Where what we try to do is build in monitoring to the remedial action plan. So as an example, with Habitat, we're going to be doing an assessment in the fall. We have talked as a committee to, we've worked with our partner, Niagara Parks, they're the land manager of that particular location, to start building in long-term monitoring as part of their strategic goals and building on what they already have to do, so we're not making extra work. So we try to build that in. With the monitoring component, though, once we have removed an environmental challenge, it doesn't go back. So if monitoring were to show that there was a problem, this is a problem with the structure of the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement. Once an environmental challenge is removed, you don't make it impaired again. It doesn't go back the other way. Even if monitoring shows that it's not meeting those objectives, it would be up to the local partners and the local government to do the work if they need to, if something was within the purview of that particular agency, but it wouldn't fall under the remedial action plan. So we're, long story short, we try to build in long-term monitoring as best we can, but it's not something that is required by the government post delisting. And it's something that many community advocacy groups have complained about for many years to the government of Canada and the US.
Okay, thank you. It seems a shame when you're basically looking at a quarter century worth of work going towards, you know, clearing some of these AOCs and all the issues, if all your good work then falls by the wayside, and or whether we don't even know, you know, after that point.
Yeah, I can confidently say for our area of concern, we make sure that our partners are conducting the monitoring that is required so that that doesn't happen, so that we don't go falling behind, and so that we don't go back to where we were. We ensure that the partners in place who have that role and responsibility are the ones implementing that long-term monitoring. And as a side note, once an AOC is delisted, the idea is that it should fall under a different Great Lakes program, which is called the Lake Ontario Management Plan, the Lake Ontario Management Plan that's called LAMP. So it would fall under there. So it's not like people walk away and don't do anything anymore. It still falls under a different purview. It's just not the same umbrella title.
Okay, thank you. Now, just one more question very quickly. Does this fall under the IWI programs that IJC has tried to implement over time?
I'm not familiar with the acronym that you just used, IWI.
I'm sorry. It's International Watershed Initiatives, and basically they are looking at watersheds, you know, within the boundary areas. I know that some of them are very, very active, and I thought that perhaps that would fall under their jurisdiction once the AOC has been cleared. But if there's not been that initiative that's been brought locally, then I guess it doesn't matter.
The International Joint Commission has a very interesting role. So they are just the overseers of the governments of Canada and the US. So they don't have purview over the remedial action plans outside of ensuring that the parties, Canada and the US, complete their commitments in the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement. So it wouldn't be part of that initiative just for several different reasons. It's very specific and tied to the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement. But the IJC, International Joint Commission, does have a role. It's just above what Canada and the US has to do with implementing. So they're more, you know, holding their feet to the fire, so to speak.
Thank you. It's always confusing when you get a lot of different layers of government and organizations involved. Well, thank you very much, Natalie. I believe that we have quorum now, do we, Grant?
We have quorum. We kind of missed that. Our procedural bylaw requires us to have quorum by 15 minutes after the stated time, or at that point, we have to adjourn to the next meeting. My idea, of course, in allowing the presentations or suggesting that the presentations go forward was because we did have staff here prepared to speak. So, I mean, that can still occur, but I don't think we can call it a meeting at this point.
That's fine, thank you. We'll continue on then with our presentations. Okay, moving on to 5B. PowerPoint presentation, read policies.
Sorry. Just a question. What time did we reach quorum?
We reached quorum when you signed on. That was our 7th of 12 people, and that was by my account about 5:23. So
for 7 minutes, we're not going to count this. Is that really how the world works?
Well, unfortunately, the issue is you could have had people signing off and signing on. At 5:15, any member of the public could have decided that we did not meet quorum in time for the meeting, therefore there's no meeting, and signed off.
Yeah.
But due to a technical, I've been trying since 5 o'clock to sign in on my PC. I tried to sign in on my iPad, and finally I was sent 2 separate fresh links to sign in. This is very disappointing if we're going to be continuing this meeting, only not to have it count for anything.
Well, I mean, respectfully, I'm sorry. I think the major intents were to hear these presentations anyway, have the report circulated to the committee. So, I mean, that's still in effect occurring. It's just not within the confines of a formal meeting.
Okay.
Sorry, can you read to me what exactly the requirement is?
Out of the procedural bylaw, and I see our CAO wants to chime in as well. Sandra, did you Did you want to speak?
Thank you, Grant. It's not I didn't hear the whole issue, but what I would like to recommend, I think we are losing quorum or having quorum something. I think at this meeting, we're not making any major decisions. We are just listening to the presentations and providing input to staff. So I really don't mind, Grant, relaxing the rules and not being too strict about the rules at this time. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think we're
Yeah.
fine to hear the presentation. It's just calling it a formal meeting and preparing formal minutes are where we don't meet the criteria. And if I may, it's as per Harry's request, it's section 4.6 of our procedural bylaw that says if no quorum is present 15 minutes after the time appointed for a meeting, the recording secretary shall call the roll call and record the names of the members present, and the meeting shall stand adjourned until the next meeting.
Well, was a roll call made
I did do a roll call.
at 5:15?
I did it shortly after 5. I don't believe it was 5:15 exactly, but I have been monitoring the.
But I think you said, Grant, that at 15 minutes you do the roll call, right?
Technically, yes. However, I was monitoring the attendance.
Well, if we're technically yes on the roll call, or we should be technically yes on the quorum. Like this just seems it's a little frustrating to me when we've got a technology issue that you know we're going to suggest that our business here is not going to count.
Well, again, I see.
Okay.
Chair,
Thank you.
can I help? Sorry, Chair, can I help? Grant, can you just repeat what the issue is?
The issue is that we have to have quorum by 5:15 for it to be called an official meeting where formal decisions are made. In the case of this meeting, we're really here to hear the presentations anyway, so there's no
There are no formal decisions being made tonight. I think the discussion items on this agenda, do we have any that where the committees, Grant?
You can't suck and blow. If the rules say that it's to be adjourned, then that's what we should be doing. Like, I'm sorry, but it's frustrating to me that, you know, if that is a rule, then we should maybe revisit how that rule is played out in the future, right? If it's due to technology issues or whatever, I think that may be something we should consider. Again, this is a meeting for the PAC, but we're also open to the public. So if there were members of the public here today participating, we're basically telling them we're 23 minutes, actually 20, whatever the time is, 38 minutes in or 35 minutes in, that by procedure this meeting has been worth nothing to this point other than presentations. And I'm not discounting the presentations. It's just a little frustrating to be told at this point. Like, we should have been told as a PAC at the time that the meeting potentially, based on the rules, was supposed to come to an end.
But I think I did try to communicate that, and that's what we decided to hear the presentations regardless in the lack of quorum. And I think we do have a member of the public here as well this evening.
Right now, I mean, we are in between the meeting. It's a virtual meeting and we are relaxing a lot of rules because of the technological issues. There are no decision items on the agenda for the committee to make. My suggestion and request to the chair, Grant, will be to carry on with the meeting and finish the meeting if you're okay with that.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Chair,
thank you, Sandra.
yeah.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Chair, I was just asking, are you okay with that?
Yes, I have no problems with, we will have to go back, I believe. Grant, we have recommendations and items that we did not formally approve. So do we go back to the beginning of this? In
I
this
want it
case,
noted for the record, whatever this.
Harry, please.
Sorry, may I speak for a second?
Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry, I sent an email at, Carrie sent an email at 5:06 asking, are there people joining the meeting? And I was trying even before that. I responded at 5:11 p.m. and I want to note for the record that I'm having difficulty joining the meeting. I'm having technical issues. I could not join either on my desktop or on my iPad. And I tried repeatedly. It wasn't until after that that I joined. So I think just procedurally for the future, I think it ought to be considered if there's record or notice from people that are on the committee trying to join but can't because of technical issues, there should be an exception to allow that meeting to go forward. Otherwise, you know, whether it's the PAC or another group that meets once every 3 months, to have a meeting go by that's not going to count because of technical issues is, to me, a failure of our procedures. So my point here is I'm not picking an argument with Grant or anybody else. I would like to avoid this problem in the future, right? There may be somebody else next time that can't make it, and we have an issue where we don't have quorum, and we go 1 meeting, 2 meetings, 3 meetings, and before you know it, you've gone the whole year and you don't have a valid meeting.
Okay, thank you, Harry.
Thank you.
Chair, we are here, the member, and we'll look at the terms of reference for the period that we are having these virtual meetings and see what we can do to accommodate that. Okay.
Thank you. Okay, to my question, Grant.
I think what we need to
Are we going back to the beginning now and going through our recommendations and having things carried, moved, seconded, etc.? Or do we go from this point onwards when Harry was with us and we had a quorum and we approved those items?
I think what we need to do is hear the next presentation. We have any mandatory motions that need to come forward. Anything that's there is to receive or to approve the minutes, and the approval of the minutes can go to the next meeting.
You're still muted, Jackie. Sorry, I know you're having challenges with the button.
Okay. Harry was with us for 5A, in which case we can, then I understand, have this motion. Recommendation number PAC 13, 2022, moved by John, seconded by Donna. The PowerPoint presentation, Collaborative Effects Towards a Healthier Niagara River Progress Update by Natalie Green, NPCA Manager, Climate Change and Special Projects, be received. Any opposed? Okay, seeing none, carried. Okay, thank you, folks. We're moving on to 5B, PowerPoint presentation, policies for the administration of Ontario Regulation 155-06 and the Planning Act May 1, 2020 Consolidation, Phase 2, Policy Review Intro, Section 28, EIS Guideline and Wetlands Procedure Document by Leilani Lee Yates, NPCA Director, Watershed Management, and this is for receipt. Leilani is the NPCA Director of Watershed Management, and I believe that she has Amy and David join her, and they will provide background on the item, including a short PowerPoint presentation. This presentation is in conjunction with agenda items 7A and B, being report number FA 2022, MPCA draft interim section 28 environmental impact study guideline, and report number FA 2122, NPCA draft interim wetlands procedure document. I will pass this on to you, Leilani.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good evening, PAC members, and thank you for having us today to make this presentation. If you just bear with me, I'll bring this slide deck up. Okay, just checking everyone can see the slides. Okay. So you may recall earlier this year, we initiated phase 1 of our policy review and procedural manual project. And that was a gap analysis looking at our policy document. And we retained Karen Wynecki from Planning Solutions, Inc. to assist us in doing a comprehensive review of our policy document, reaching out to PAC members, other stakeholders, municipal partners, doing internal interviews as well to obtain input on, as well as with our board members, input on what they perceive were some of the gaps and inconsistencies or challenges with our current policy document. And the result was a phase 1 gap analysis report that identified a series of recommendations for moving forward with our phase 2 work and recommended a work program for the remainder of this year to bring forward an updated policy document and procedural manual. When we took forward that report and based on the input that we received, it was apparent that there was urgency for us to move forward on some interim documents and not wait till the end of the year to get a few things in place. And two of the items that we're going to be presenting on tonight are first deliverables and some of those gaps that were identified that were priorities and urgent for us to get in place sooner than later. The first one was our Conservation Act, Section 28. These are our permits, EIS guideline, and a Wetlands Procedure document. And both are intended to provide clarity on process and policy interpretation and implementation to assist landowners and consultants and also with our partner municipalities so they understand what our requirements are from our permitting process when an EIS is required and when we are looking at regulated wetlands as part of our permits. So with me tonight, as the chair has introduced, is David Deleuze, and he's our Senior Manager of Environmental Policy and Planning, and he's the lead on this project, staff lead. I'm here to sponsor the team, and also with me is Amy Parks, and she's our Manager of Planning Ecology, and her team members were also instrumental in our working group. Adam Aldworth and Teresa Bukovics, who aren't with us this evening, but were involved in making a similar presentation to our governance committee and board. And also on our working group is Sarah Mastrioni, who's our manager of planning and permits. And on our working group, we're experts in planning and ecology and biology. Some of us have been with the MPCA for more than a decade and bring, invaluable experience and expertise in the MPCA watersheds. So we're really proud of the work that we've done on these two policy documents. And it was received really well from both our governance committee and our board of directors when it went forward for approval back in May. Trying to advance here. Are the slides advancing? Oh, there we go. Everyone see the next slide, number 2? Okay, great. So I'll just recap where we are with the phase 2 policy work and moving forward. And David and Amy will be speaking to the phase 2 technical guidance that we're bringing forward at this time, as well as some more technical information on the wetlands policy procedure. And I'll take an overview of our EIS guideline for the committee. So our phase 2 really kicked off with the approval of the work plan back in March from our board of directors. We're in the data gathering, technical study and analysis phase. We're in the process of retaining a couple of consultants to assist us in this work. We will be undertaking a couple discussion papers, one that's more technical on buffer widths, which was, again, an item identified through our consultation and discussions with our stakeholders and internally to clarify buffer widths with a specific direction from our board to look at that specifically as part of our policy review. And we'll be preparing a discussion paper on the various themes that have come out of our gap analysis. So as part of the work currently, we have our interim guideline, EIS guideline, and wetland procedures document, and we're preparing an engagement strategy. So moving into July and August, we'll be presenting the discussion papers and the engagement strategy to our governance committee and board to seek approval to move forward with engagement over the summer. We intend to engage with PAC, and we'll be reaching out to Carrie on how best to do that. If we could do a type of presentation and workshop, as well as using surveys again for the phase 2 work, and also doing a virtual PIC. For the broader community as well, and keeping an open invitation if there are any sectors who wish to meet with us. Our consultant who we're engaging is open to doing one-on-one type interviews with people who are interested, as well as if there's any invitations to make presentations, staff are open to those invitations as well. Moving into the fall, if there are any priority policies that have been identified that we wish to move in advance quicker than the full policy update, we'll be considering that and looking to bring those forward in the fall. And also reporting back on the consultation process and having a summary document on that. And then moving into later in the fall and into the winter, bringing forward the fulsome updated policy document and procedural manual, and allowing another opportunity for engagement, posting it on the website, giving a window for consultation and comments, and then coming back, aiming for the end of the year for board approval moving forward. We do recognize that our Section 28 regulation from the province hasn't been released at this point. There may need to be additional updates done at that time, but we're moving forward to the best of our ability to bring forward the most fulsome documents that we can, recognizing that there are some limitations in waiting for that regulation to come forward. But there's a clear need, having done the phase 1 policy analysis, that there's some critical gaps and a need for clarity around some of our policies, and the need for a procedural manual, which we don't have one currently, that we do need to get something in place this year. So I also do want to note that this work is also responsive to PAC's discussion paper and the identification of, looking at a systems approach, a natural heritage systems approach to protection. And the guideline and the wetlands procedure document allow for that clarity and guidance on how to approach the technical work and studies when permits come forward, and ensuring that the development has no negative impact to the system. We note the need to look at cumulative impacts when doing an EIS, which is something that hasn't been stressed before in the past. So that's something that we're putting forward in the guidelines now with expectations, as well as, balancing sustainable development and environmental protection, and scoping this work so it's clear where the work needs to focus on, and what the impacts, which features need to be studied to determine impacts and mitigation. And overall, with this process, it will bring more clarity and bring in best practices, based on science and other jurisdictions into our day-to-day practice and formalize it. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to David, who's going to speak to a bit more of the background to these documents. So over to you, David. Are you there, David?
Sorry.
Okay, I can hear you now.
Yeah. So we had taken a board report in March recommending, basically it was the phase 1 summary report. And in that board report, there were recommendations for preparing the EIS guidelines and the wetland procedure document. So the board approved those documents, or those recommendations, I should say, and that's what led us to develop the current guidelines and interim wetland procedure. So right now, the NPCA does not have any EIS guidelines, which is a big gap. Same thing with the wetland procedures. There's a number of policies where we lack the right guidance on implementing them. So these will give us the necessary tools to help make sure, for example, EISs are scoped appropriately and consistently. They'll also give us clarity on when undertaking certain application types, how to deal with those. The documents, they're both interim, and they will be reviewed in an ongoing fashion as part of the phase 2 policy update. And there will be opportunities, as Leilani was highlighting in the schedule, for public input during that process. And in particular, for example, one key sector we'll be reaching out to will be the agricultural community as part of the phase 2 update. So the final documents will eventually be incorporated into the procedural manual. Now, one area in particular that is worth highlighting that these documents will benefit greatly is the wetland reconfiguration and compensation section within our current policy document. Now, this section has been in place since our policies first came into effect in December of 2007. That was the first version of our policy document following the implementation of our regulation. The lack of a procedure right now makes implementing that policy consistently challenging. The reconfiguration and compensation policies, just so that people are aware, they're only used in situations where a small adjustment to a wetland boundary is needed to allow for a functional site design to be achieved on the site. That's the test that has been used by staff in order to make sure, or when we're implementing that policy. The most common situation where we use this policy, or where it has been used in recent years, is when through a development application, there are unmapped wetlands identified on the property, and those wetlands would otherwise interfere with having a functional design of the site. Now, key thing to understand is this is only applicable for non-provincially significant wetlands. So PSWs are not subject to the reconfiguration or compensation policy. Now, having said all of this, with our policy document being open for review, we will be reviewing the compensation reconfiguration policy as part of the policy update. Next slide, please. Okay, so there are several policies in our document that trigger the need for an EIS, whether it's a development adjacent to a wetland, in some cases, development adjacent to valley lands or other regulated features may also trigger the need for an EIS. Now, the purpose of the EIS guideline is to provide education for and clarity for the public as well as applicants about what NPCA's requirements are when completing an EIS. Now, in developing the EIS guidelines, we looked at what other conservation authorities and what municipalities are doing for best management practices with EISs. The guideline provides direction and clarity around when an EIS is required, what circumstances might an EIS be waived, how to scope an EIS, and the environmental components or the actual study components that need to be included in the EIS. Also, we note that this will help ensure that EISs are completed to an appropriate and consistent standard. The guideline reflects current practice and incorporates new best practices such as scoping checklist, as well as environmental impact study submission checklist. In many instances where an EIS is required, it's also by the NPCA, it's also required by either the municipality in question, whether it's an upper tier municipality like Niagara Region or a lower tier municipality, or other agencies such as the Niagara Escarpment Commission. So the guideline gives guidance for the need to coordinate with other agencies where there is overlapping jurisdiction. Next slide, please. So a little more about the wetland procedure. The goal of the wetland procedure document is similarly to educate the public and applicants about MPCA's wetland policies in the review process of the wetland policies. The document provides information about the importance of the ecological and hydrological functions of a wetland. The document provides clarity for the public, landowners, and applicants about the MPCA's expectation and study requirements when development is proposed near a wetland. The document is based on research of best practices for assessing impacts to wetland. The document is to be read in conjunction with the EIS guidelines and reflects current MPCA practice. So the two documents are meant to complement one another. Now, similar to the EIS guideline, the document does speak to the need to coordinate with other agencies where there is overlapping jurisdiction. Next slide, please. Now, just wanted to talk a little bit more about our reconfiguration and compensation policy. Unfortunately, in the past, there's been a lot of bad publicity on the MPCA with respect to the compensation section, and certainly understandably so. So as noted earlier, the MPCA's current policies, and specifically its section 8.2.2.8, provide the opportunity for reconfiguration or compensation of non-provincially significant wetlands. And again, it has to be stressed that this policy is used as a last resort. It's not the first go-to when someone's looking to do development on a site. A requirement of the policy is that an EIS has to be completed to examine the form and function of the wetland that is going to be reconfigured and to inform the needs of the wetland that is being created. Now, MPCA generally seek to achieve a net gain when we're applying this policy. So if you have form and function, we are trying to improve in the newly created wetland or the enhanced wetland. We're trying to achieve greater function than what was being lost. Now, there are a number of requirements to implement this policy, such as reconfiguration or compensation plan, the monitoring plan, making sure that anything that is planted continues to grow, and any species that die, they get replaced. Financial securities to guarantee the work, and a legal agreement to implement the plans and specify the legal terms for monitoring and conditions where the securities may be used. Other studies could also be required as well. Hydrology study or hydrogeological study, again, depending on what feature may overlap with the wetland or what components of the wetland need to be examined. Now, again, it has to be stipulated, providing the necessary information along with a permit application does not guarantee that the application for wetland reconfiguration or compensation would be approved. There may be other policy reasons or issues with the EIS that would result in staff refusing the permit for a requested compensation. So with that, I'll turn it over to Amy for the next slide.
I think it goes to me for a little bit still. Back to
Oh, sorry, my bad.
So,
Yep.
sorry for the jumping around, folks. We've made this presentation a few times, and we've had to regroup some of the slides. So I'll provide an overview of the Section 28 EIS guideline process that we've developed. There's 5 steps, and I'll be breaking them down into a bit more detail here. So, oops, sorry about that. So at the beginning, step 1, an application is made, and we need to determine if an EIS is triggered. And that's really looking back at the policies, our policies and our regulation to see if the proposed works require an EIS if it's triggered. If we look at the policies and the development that's being proposed and determine, nope, no EIS is required, there's no impact to the features, or perhaps there's already studies that have been completed that are applicable to the site, that, you know, therefore a specific EIS may not be required, then no further action is needed. If the policies are triggered and an EIS is required, And we say, okay, can it be exempt? And by doing so, can it be modified? So if there's a proposal, say in a wetland buffer, and it triggers an EIS, and we go back to the applicant and we say, hey, do you think you can move it a little this way and outside of the buffer? And they agree to, and they modify their application. And at that time, we can say, okay, so there's no EIS to move forward at this time. If that's not an option, then we say, okay, is there any mitigative measures that can be done where we could waive an EIS if, you know, the location and the nature of the application is as such that there's mitigative measures that can be put in place, such as plantings, some restoration work that would mitigate the impacts without doing an EIS, then we would consider that. And we could waive the EIS provided that there's conditions that are added to the permit that they would need to satisfy. When we presented this to our governance committee, we haven't developed a waiving tool yet. There are some municipalities out there that we're looking at as examples that have developed formal tools to look at the risk of the development, the sensitivity of the features, and going through a process, a risk-based scientific process to determine whether or not an EIS could be waived based on mitigative measures. And the direction from our governance committee is they would very much like us to pursue that and develop a tool for the MPCA and for our ES guidelines. So as part of our process moving forward, we'll be looking to develop that tool as part of the final procedural manual and EIS guideline. So at the end of the day, after we go through the first step and an EIS is required, we move on. And we start scoping the EIS. So there is a checklist we developed that's in the EIS guideline. It is our staff who, oh, just hold on one moment. I think my battery may be running low. Pardon me, Madam Chair, just let me plug it in. My apologies. Our technical staff will look at that checklist and check off the areas that need to be done for the EIS and provides that to the applicant. And the applicant will then prepare a draft terms of reference, submit that to MPCA staff for review. MPCA staff take a look at that terms of reference, cross-reference it back to the scoping terms of reference checklist. If it requires revisions, its comments are sent back to the applicant and resubmitted. Once staff are satisfied with the terms of reference that have been submitted, the applicant and their consultants move forward to step 3, which is preparing the EIS. And at this time, there may be field work that's required, site visits from MPCA staff to confirm delineation of features, and the EIS is prepared. So then the EIS is submitted to our staff. There is an Eis submission checklist that the applicant must prepare to submit with the EIS. It's sent to our staff to review for completeness. If there are any deficiencies, those comments are made back to the applicant and they're asked to address those deficiencies. If we review it and we feel it's a complete EIS package, again, cross-referencing back to the terms of reference and the scoped checklist, we undertake our review. If there are comments, we send them back to be addressed. When we are satisfied with the EIS, then we ask that a final package is submitted as well as a data package. And this is really important to help us update our data sets and our reg mapping. If, say, features are delineated with more accuracy in the field, that would help us update our data layers as well. So then that package is submitted to us. Again, if there's deficiencies, we would let the applicant know, and upon satisfactory completion, we mark the EIS complete. So again, we've developed this process based on our current practice, as well as looking at other best practices out there and looking for some of those tools like the checklists that we've developed to include in the EIS guideline. So with that, I believe now I'm turning it over to Amy.
Yes, thank you. Over the next few slides, I'm going to speak about evaluated and unevaluated wetlands. So within the NPCA's watershed, a substantial amount of wetlands have been evaluated by the formal MNRF, now it's the MND MNRF, following the Ontario Wetland Evaluation Protocol called OES. And fortunately, in the NPCA watershed, the Niagara region, compared to other conservation authorities, we've had a significant amount of wetlands mapped. Some areas north of here don't have very much mapped. So we're very fortunate with that regard. So the MND MNRF undertook a comprehensive review of wetlands within the NPCA's watershed in 2009. Evaluated wetlands are those which have been evaluated following the Ontario Wetland Evaluation System, and they are called provincially significant wetlands, which means that they have a score of 600 points through the OES or 200 points with either special features or the biological component. So special features would include, for example, habitat for endangered species or species at risk. And a biological component would include biodiversity, wetland type, number of wetlands in a complex, for example. If a wetland has been evaluated and does not meet the criteria to be a provincially significant wetland, it's considered to be a non-provincially significant wetland. Sometimes you'll see that as non-PSW, or it's also known as a locally significant wetland, called an LSW. Wetland evaluation files are living documents. They're open files, and they're amended from time to time as new information becomes available. These files are administered by MND MNRF, and any changes to evaluated wetlands, such as boundary revisions, polygon additions or deletions, or complexing, are subject to review and approval by MND MNRF. Next slide, please. Unevaluated wetlands. Unevaluated wetlands are wetlands which have not been evaluated following the OES, the Ontario Wetland Evaluation System. However, they're present on the landscape. Unevaluated wetlands are identified through a number of screening tools, such as our Natural Areas Inventory, the Province of Ontario's Land Information Mapping, air photo interpretation, site visits, or site-specific studies. Through the NPCA's review process, unevaluated wetlands which have been identified may be required to be evaluated by a qualified professional. These evaluations are subject to review and approval by MND MNRF staff. Prior to and following approval of the wetland evaluation, wetlands identified on the landscape are subject to NPCA's policies and regulations, as David referred to earlier. Should MND MNRF not require an evaluation of the unevaluated wetland, the NPCA will continue to require technical assessment of the feature to demonstrate conformance with policies and regulations. So this may include studies such as environmental impact studies, water balances, and so on. Next slide, please. This slide is just to give you an idea of mapping and how we look at air photo interpretation. So this is actually a real scenario, which I love this, because on this map you'll see a provincially significant wetland, which is the red polygon. And then, as mentioned previously, there can be unevaluated wetlands that are identified through natural areas inventories. So on this map, you can see that there's a green hatched area actually just across the way from the provincially significant wetland. There's also unevaluated wetlands, which have been identified by MND MNRF, which are identified as a gray polygon in the lower half of the figure there. Next slide, please. Next steps. The Board of Directors approved our interim documents on May 20th, 2022. Staff will make the interim documents available on the website. They just have to meet ADAO assessment prior to that, and we will circulate the documents to our municipal partners, consultants, landowners as needed. Staff will direct the applicants to the interim documents and guide them through the process and technical requirements. We understand, particularly at the beginning, we may have a lot of questions. We're more than happy to field those. And then finally, the technical documents will be included within our newly created procedural manual.
So with that, we'd like to thank you for your time and our opportunity to present sort of our first two deliverables of our phase 2 work to you. We look forward to continuing to engage PAC through our work this year, and we'll take any questions that you have.
Thank you very much, folks. Any questions or comments? Chandra, you do have your hand up. I'm assuming it's from before.
It's a stale hand, Jackie. I'm sorry. I'll take it off.
Thank you.
I have some.
John, please go ahead.
Thank you. And as a representative of the urban planning component on this committee, I certainly welcome and applaud you for your efforts to provide these guidelines and procedures, because the one thing we need is in the development industry and in the planning industry is knowing what we're involved in, what the process is going to be, what you expect of the development industry. So from that standpoint, I think this is a great step forward. I always look for balance, and balance is difficult when the farmer can plow right up to the drip line and beyond. But when we put in a development, we have to have a 30-meter setback. We have to have naturalization occurring. And then we also have to respect the drip line. And it just seems, you know, agriculture can do pretty well what it wants, but when we come forward with development applications, what was once a plowed field with soybeans or corn has to now become naturalized, and it just seems, you know, kind of a double standard. I would also encourage, when the next phases of this, these guidelines come forward, I'd love to convene a session with the urban planning group, with the number of environmental consultants that we work with on a daily basis. There will be tremendous interest in this, and I think the more input you get from other professionals, the better the document will be. So I certainly look forward to you know, working with you and inviting you to attend a couple workshops or seminars with the people that I interact with on a daily basis. So I think this is a great step forward, and I look forward to further fine tuning.
Thank you, John. And through the chair and Carrie, we will connect with you and make sure we put you on our schedule for the summer.
Fabulous. Thank you.
Thank you. Chandra, your hand is up again. Please go ahead.
Sorry, Jackie. I'm trying to get it down. It's not working for me.
It was waving this time. I thought perhaps he'd come back. Okay. Any other questions or comments?
Yep, it's me, Donna.
Oh,
I
yeah,
don't
I
know
was
where
gonna
my
say
hand
Donna.
is. So
Go ahead, Donna.
I have a couple questions. What percentage of your applications are landowner versus developer?
I'll defer to David if he has specific stats, but you know, typically with permits, a lot of them are landowner, decks, pools, building a new house, doing additions. There's a large bulk of that, as well as you know, new agricultural operations as well. Oh, sorry, and of course in the more high growth areas and urban areas where there are large development applications, where they are in our regulated areas, we are involved in those applications as well. But I think generally there is a large volume of you know, landowners just wishing to do work on their properties, which happen to be regulated.
Okay. My next question is, when I look at your definition of wetland, and I understand M&R's definition of wetlands and all the definitions of wetlands, you know, 90% of Fort Erie is a wetland. Like, is there a way to reverse engineer instead of having people run out there and describe what they're doing? isn't there a way to say, here's what we've got, and these are all our wetlands, and here's the area where you can actually do something, as opposed to the other way around? You know, can we do something here? Yes. No. Maybe. How about you reverse the whole system and look at it and say, okay, you know, all of Fort Erie is underwater for 8 months of the year. Like, you know, the whole Lincoln soil plain water table sits at the surface, and rural areas out. Like, I don't understand why it has to be so complicated, right? My brain only does 5 steps, and when there's more than 5 steps, it doesn't work. My next question is you talked about cumulative impacts, and I want to caution you about cumulative protections. When we wrote the nutrient management legislation, it was my job to make sure that yes, there can be cumulative impacts, but as you write every single one of these individual, you know, you must do this, and the distance is this, and the distance is that, remember that they're all still cumulative benefits and protections. And when we wrote the legislation, we had to be very careful that we didn't, you know, this one has an area of caution, and this has an area of caution, and this has an area of caution, and we're going to make them do all 15 of them. And by the time you're done, you've like triple, quadruple protected everything and everybody. I'm asking that some kind of sensitivity analysis be done to figure out where you think development would pass in the area, right? When we wrote legislation before, you know, you ran around and said, okay, this would affect how many people, right? How many of my development applications would actually have to hire a consultant to fill in this process? And how many of my development applications, you know, if you're just putting in a pool, you only do step A and step B? Like, I don't understand why this has to be so complicated. And as a person with ADHD and a disability for paperwork, I got a 5-step limit, and I saw a lot more than 5 steps in the process. So those are my concerns. I would like them to be noted. And good luck when you go to the agricultural community.
Thank you, Donna.
No problem.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, I do have one comment. You're talking about doing public consults during the summertime. I understand that, you know, you do have timelines and that you're trying to move this forward as quickly as possible. I would caution you against doing general consults. Perhaps if you can do things that are limited, very focused, then, you know, that's one thing. But I know from previous experience that people are busy during the summer. They're often not paying attention, and then come the fall, you're going to have a lot of pushback that, oh, well, you did it during the summer. You know, you were just trying to push it through, and no one was paying any attention. So that's just a bit of a heads up. I know my dealings with City of Ottawa, we got to the point that we didn't do anything during summer when it came to consults, just because, you know, things had gone poorly enough times that it was just pretty well set in stone that July and August were off limits for consults. So just a comment. If there's no other comments or questions, then we will say thank you to the 3 of you for your information, and we will move on to the paperwork with recommendation number PAC 14, 2022, moved by Joe and seconded by Kelsey. You're both with us. That the PowerPoint presentation read policies for the administration of Ontario regulation 155-06 in the Planning Act, May 1, 2020 Consolidation, Phase 2, Policy Review, Interim, Section 28 DIS Guideline and Wetlands Procedure Document by Rolani Lee Yates, NPCA Director. Watershed Management be received. Any opposed? Seeing none, that is carried. Thank you very much, folks. I look forward to the details, and I know a lot of people will be looking forward to the details in the general public, so we will be talking about this in the future. Okay, moving on to item 7, consent items. So this is related, I guess, with we won't need comments or questions. Report number FA 2022 re-NPCA draft interim section 28 environmental impact study guideline for receipt. Recommendation number PAC 15 2022 moved by Michael, seconded by Natalie. Is Natalie with us? Let's say Harry. That report number FA 2022 re-NPCA draft interim section 28 environmental impact study guideline be received. Opposed? Seeing none, that is carried. On to 7B, report number FA 2122 re-NPCA draft interim wetlands procedure document for receipt. Again, I don't expect that we need comments or questions. Recommendation number PAC 16 2022 moved by Harry, seconded by Michael. That report number FA 2122 re-NPCA draft interim wetlands procedure document be received. Any opposed? Seeing none, carried. Great, thanks, folks. Moving on, item 8, we don't have any discussion items. Committee reports for item 9A, minutes of the Watershed Floodplain Subcommittee meeting dated May 26, 2022 for approval. Recommendation number PAC 17 2022 moved by Donna, and I need a seconder. Joe, you were at that meeting, weren't you?
I was.
Thank you. I'll ask you to second. Thank you. That the minutes of the Watershed Floodplain Subcommittee meeting dated May 26, 2022 be received. Any opposed? Seeing none, that is carried. Okay, new business, 10A CAO update. Please go ahead, Chandra.
Chair Black, sorry, I'm in a public location. I have no updates at this time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Then we won't need the paperwork on that. Member updates for B, verbal. Does anyone have any information, issues, items of interest for members? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to take my chair hat off for a moment and just mention that recently there's been a lot of activity, a lot of input from the general public, comments, questions, concerns regarding activities that are occurring within the NPCA watershed. Just to say that I'm getting a lot of questions really regarding what is PAC's role when it comes to dealing with issues. in which I can basically just say that, okay, one of the things we do is what we've done tonight in reviewing and receiving staff presentations, making comments, etc. And recommending things at times that do go to the board. And our secondary, I guess, function is to be a liaison with the community and to take the information that we receive here and from NPCA staff and to share it with the public. What I think under the liaison role we need to consider, and this is something for, I guess, a discussion item perhaps later. I'm just flagging it at this point, so perhaps we can get into this at our next meeting, is that I'm getting a lot of comments that the liaison role isn't really including bringing issues that are out in the community forward to the staff and the board. And certainly through our discussion paper that went forward to the board, a few of these items might have been touched on in a very general basis, but I think that there's more opportunities to really start to encourage two-way discussions and communications. The public, at least through my discussions with a number of different folks within the environmental sector and the general public, are really feeling that they don't have a venue to bring their concerns forward and to actually really be heard. I think this is really important and really quite necessary to ensure that we're fulfilling our liaison part of our mandates, but also to ensure that we are going to continue to be relevant, because what I'm seeing at times is that PAC is not being involved in discussions that, for example, have come to me, issues that basically I've taken forward to staff and I've not heard any more about it. So both as a chair and as an environmental representative on this committee, I think that it is important to take a look at where PAC might need to be involved in the future, and both helping, I guess, the discussion and encouraging the communications between the public and ourselves, and to ensure that the issues really are being heard and are being dealt with, and ensuring as well that there are answers and concerns are resolved as much as possible. So I'm going to really ask everyone at this point, very open-ended, to think about this for our next meeting. I'm going to make sure that it does go on to the agenda, that we identify ways to encourage productive two-way communications and inclusion from each of our sectors with bringing forward issues from the outside, as well as us, as I say, communicating NTC information out the other way. So it's really just a comment, as I say, from the environmental end of things. It's really no surprise, given that there is so much activity out there that, so many people are coming forward. But I think that there are opportunities to address this more fully. So with that, recommendation number PAC 19, 2022. I guess I should, before I do this, I should be asking for further comments or questions on what I've said. Okay, seeing none. Recommendation number PAC 19/2022, been moved by Joe and seconded by Harry, that member updates for information, issues, items of interest be received. Any opposed? Seeing none, that is carried. We're moving on to adjournment. Recommendation number PAC 2022, moved by John and seconded by Kelsey, that the PAC meeting of June 2nd, 2022 be adjourned at 6:35 p.m. Opposed? Seeing none, carried. Okay, folks, thank you very much. I believe our next meeting is in September, so have a wonderful summer. And I guess we'll talk to everyone then.
Sorry, Jackie, I just remembered the September 21st or 22nd meeting. I was going to ask if people would be willing to have that one moved slightly. I'll send around some dates that are possible and see what works, but we are planning to hopefully have the volunteer appreciation / conservation awards on September 21st. And so in the interest of hoping that PAC members can join us for that event and not have you tied up 2 days in a row, we were going to propose possibly moving that date. I just wondered if there's any specific dates in September that do or don't work for folks that are in the room today.
Okay.
Or you can get back to me at another time if you don't have your calendars in front of you or anything like that.
A week later is better for me. A week later is better for me because I'm going to be away.
A week later?
Yeah.
Sorry, Jackie, you were saying something as well.
Leilani, you had said that you were going to be consulting further with PAC, was it on the EIS wetland issue? Is that something that should be happening at the next meeting or prior to, perhaps a different format workshop?
We wish to, again, to your point, it will be summertime, so I was going to reach out to yourself and Carrie on how best to format that. For the phase 1 work, we did send out a survey, but we are hoping if they're interested PAC members, we can have a focused type workshop if staff are available during our consultation time.
Okay, thank you. I think that might be a better way to deal with this fully as opposed to trying to embed it in a meeting. Sorry, Kat. I almost kept them down the whole time. Okay, so Carrie, I guess the best thing then is to send around some dates and, Dawn is saying the week later. Perhaps we can take a look at the week after the 21st, that's what, the 28th, 29th. And we'll see who else is available for them. We'll work from there.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay. Thanks. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you,
Good
everyone.
night, thank you.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night, everyone.